This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. We are joined once again by the wonderful Jill Bucaro, who is joining us from Wellness Riot in LA. How are you today, Jill?
I'm awesome. The weather's great here. How about you?
Oh, we've just come out of -25. It's a bit better today. Anyway, I think we'll get straight to the point here, and I'm going to ask you this question. Sugar, is it inherently evil?
No,
Okay.
but it depends. I say that with a little hesitation. No, but it depends on what the sugar is, right? Like a calorie isn't a calorie, isn't a calorie. And that goes for sugar as well, right? So a blueberry versus soda is a little bit different. The refined nature of a soda versus something natural that we find in nature, like a blueberry, is very different. So I would say, a blueberry comes with fiber and comes with minerals and comes with phytonutrients and comes with all of the things surrounding the sugar that helps our body process it in the correct way. Whereas something like soda is not a natural sugar to our bodies. So we process it very differently, very quickly. It taxes our liver a different way. It taxes our gut a different way. It spikes our blood sugar, if you've heard of the sugar crash, right? And then before that, you're kind of nuts. So it depends, I would say, on the sugar, whether it's evil or not.
So what you're saying is that not all sugars are created equally. Tell me a little bit about the differences between different types of sugars.
So there's so many different kinds of sugar. And in fact, just on a label, that we might read on an ingredient label, there's over 60 names for sugar.
Yes.
So, it's almost difficult to pinpoint where sugar might be in a product because it can be named one of 60 different things. And I will take a side note. So food companies use that to their advantage. So if you take something like granola or jelly or cereal or muffin or something like that, where sugar probably is the number one ingredient and should be listed that way on the ingredient label, what they do is they put 3, 4, 5 different kinds of sugar in the product. So it can be brown sugar, cane sugar, honey, and fructose, for example, or fruit juice. Now, those ingredients can be number 3, 4, 6, and 7.
Yes.
Right? So now you're the consumer and you're looking at the label and you're like, oh, the first ingredient is strawberries. Oh, the first ingredient is oats. Like, how healthy. When really all they've done is separate the kinds of sugar so they can put it farther down the ingredient label. Because as you know, the ingredients are listed in order of, proportion to the whole product, right? So what makes the biggest appearance is listed first down to the last. So if they separate the sugar, they can move it down the ingredient list. And now as a consumer, you think it's a little bit healthier than it probably actually is.
So if one were to villainize sugar, it would make more sense to villainize refined sugar and or table sugar, right?
Absolutely. It processes really differently than things like the blueberries, our fruits, dates, even things like honey, have like some mineral properties, that makes it a little bit different than like a refined table sugar or a soda or something like that. Because anything that's in its natural form has those supportive, like I mentioned, like the fiber and things like that, that just make it easier for our body to process. So not all sugar is created equal. It's that refined sugar that we tend to, and probably rightfully so, like villainize as opposed to like fruit. Like I never tell people to like stop eating fruit if you like it. I wouldn't eat fruit all day as your only thing, right? But I wouldn't say that about any food. You shouldn't eat one thing all day. But that's much different than soda, fruit juice, cakes, things like that.
I saw an interesting allegory when I was doing some research for this, and it was talking about the way in which coca leaves used to be chewed by South Americans to give them that boost of energy. Then that was further refined and concentrated into cocaine as a powder, which was either snorted and or put into solution and injected, and then ramping it up once again into crack, which concentrated it and gave it a much more immediate impact. And much the same could be said about sugar and going from whether it's sugar beet or more likely sugar cane, which, some people used to chew on sugar canes, all the way through to that highly refined sugar that we have today, which concentrates and increases the impact of what is contained within, right?
Right. And it's funny that you should mention it to the coca or the cocaine, because it does light up the same part of our brain as cocaine, right? It's equally addictive. In fact, you can argue more addictive, up to 8 times, depending on what study you look at. They did a study with lab rats who were cocaine addicted, and they gave them the option for sugar water or cocaine water. And I think it was upwards of like 80% chose the sugar water. So, I mean, even a cocaine addicted, in this case, lab rat, is going to choose sugar.
They would switch over to the sugar addiction, right?
Switch over. Yeah. Yes, I mean, they're already addicted to something, and they're going to switch to sugar, which I think, most people would say like, well, yeah, I know it's not good for you. I don't think most of us understand the real impact that we have, and that when we're consuming it, like really what's happening to us on a biological level, right? And then we blame our willpower or, our lack of, ability to resist, when really it's our biology. I mean, it's very addictive.
Now, you'll know the answer to this. I have some background on it, but why is it we have such an attraction to sugar as human beings?
Well, at one point, it really behooved us to find calorie dense, foods, because, if we think of ourselves 10,000 years ago, or, however long ago, we didn't have a steady source of food.
Hunter-gatherers, right?
We didn't have grocery stores and, delivery. Now we have delivered to our door, 24 hours a day. So it was to our benefit to find things that were calorically dense, or that had that sugar and that glucose that could feed our energy and allow us to find the next meal, et cetera.
And it would also help you put on fat, which was seen as being a definite advantage in those days when you never knew where your next meal was coming from. It's not like you could just go around the corner to a drive-through.
100%. What drove us back then drove us for a reason. It was to our benefit to get through the winter, or like you said, to get through the next meal. We don't have those same issues right now. Most people have access to food, pretty regularly and pretty easily, but we still have those same instincts. I mean, genetically, it's been a long time that humans have been on the planet, and our current status is a very tiny sliver of that. So our genetics, right, haven't had time to adapt to having food around us 24/7. So we still have a lot of the same instincts that we've had, through the rest of human history.
Now, one of those instincts, which was also to do with the survival of the species, was tied in again to the same neurotransmitters, namely dopamine for the most part, as cocaine, heroin. And the other thing that would keep your species alive was, of course, sex, so procreation, which is very much connected to that. So you've got your inherent biological need to eat, which is either to get that energy, the calorie dense food, and or put on fat to store it, and also to procreate and to continue the survival of the species, right?
Right, all of that.
Here's a question for you. What happens when a human ingests sugar?
So a couple of things. One is that it taxes our liver, especially fructose. So like when they are talking about like high fructose corn syrup and why is that worse than regular sugar? It's got a higher percentage of fructose as opposed to like a glucose or something like that. And so that taxes our liver, as the same as alcohol, right? When the liver gets taxed or overtaxed, it has no choice but to turn that excess sugar into fat for storage. And again, it thinks it's doing the right thing, right? I'm going to hang on to this because I don't know what's coming. So it can impact our liver. And I mean, our liver does, about 400 things in our body, and everything from detoxification to hormone and cholesterol. They contributes to the promotion or creation and regulation of those. So it does a million things, or immune function, digestion. So when the liver's taxed, we're kind of, in a situation where we're not performing optimally, but can also just, increase our hunger because we're taking in just sugar, especially if it's refined sugar. It doesn't have any nutrients. It doesn't really have any volume. And so it's not triggering those volume and nutrient receptors that are throughout our digestive tract that tell us that we're full and we're satisfied and to stop eating. So it can, continue to increase our hunger. And it's kind of like our body's like, no, I didn't really get what I wanted. I didn't really get what I needed. So try again, right? Yeah. Remain hungry. It suppresses our immune system. And I think you were just mentioning, our mood, right? Like a high consumption of sugar can lead to low moods or mood fluctuations. So it's got, and then just in addition to being addictive, right? So it's kind of can turn into a vicious cycle. So there's lots of impacts it has on us.
Another thing I find very interesting is the long-term impact of the consumption of sugar. Now, you did speak briefly about the sugar rush, something that I have witnessed often in children, less so in adults, but you do get that sugar high and then the withdrawal from it for sure. But one thing that's a little bit more worrying are the long-term impacts of this, perhaps an addiction to sugar, which would manifest themselves perhaps months, years, decades later in type 2 diabetes, obesity, and the like. I mean, we wouldn't start to notice the damage or the impact it had upon ourselves until we started to put on weight or were diagnosed with some kind of ailment like connected to that. At the roots of the discourse that we have today concerning sugar and its relationship to disease go all the way back to the early 1670s. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there was a fellow called Thomas Willis, who was the medical advisor to the Duke of York and Charles II. And he began to notice a prevalence of a condition that he called the pissing evil in many of his wealthier clients. Now, we have to remember, if you're going back to the 1670s, sugar was an absolute luxury. Mm-hmm. Now, I find this quite strange. He notes that the urine of these very, very wealthy clients of his began to smell and taste sweet. Quite what he was doing tasting their urine, I don't know. But nevertheless, science. And of course, that would have been the onset of diabetes in these wealthier clients who had the money to be able to afford sugar. Sugar was known as white gold back then because it was so valuable. Now, there's an interesting, it's not coincidence, it correlates directly in the 1670s with the first flow of sugar from the British Caribbean colonies, and also the first use of sugar in tea, which again was something else that was really only ingested by the wealthier classes at that point. So I found that quite fascinating, that there was already some kind of cognizance of there being a link between sugar and disease.
That is so interesting that he would have made that connection, because I think there are other foods and food groups that really only the wealthy had access to. So interesting that he made that connection and not say to like, animal proteins or meat or something else, right, that they would have access to.
Now, if we were to look at the darker side of sugar, it is, of course, linked intricately with empire and the slave trade. Because in the UK, the only readily available psychoactive compound was alcohol, which is a depressant. Suddenly, all of these different foods, he calls them drug foods, were coming from the tropics, from the colonies. So they were bringing in rum, which of course is made of sugar, tea, coffee, chocolate, and tobacco. So you had all of these stimulants. We take rum out of there. And there is quite a good argument that the British Empire was built on a sugar, nicotine, and caffeine rush. And back in the, let's say, the 1700s, the average UK citizen, this was once sugar became much more available, and because there was an abundance of production from South America and the Caribbean, it became cheaper and cheaper. And around about the 1800s, I would say, the average UK citizen would consume around 5 pounds of sugar per annum. Now, from the latest numbers, I hear the FDA have said the average American citizen is consuming something closer to 150 pounds of sugar per annum.
Yeah, it depends on if I've seen different stats, and it depends on if they're just doing added sugar or like all sugar. But yes,
Right.
it's well over 100 pounds now, whereas same thing 100 years ago, 200 years ago here, it was less than 20 pounds, of sugar per year. So the access is much higher. And that has to do, I know here, at least in the United States, with the subsidizing of things like corn, which they turn into high fructose corn syrup. So it makes, sodas and sweet treats and all that like very, very inexpensive. And things, even things savory that we don't think of as sweet, like crackers and breads and salad dressings and barbecue sauces and all that, right? Like sugar is hidden everywhere.
We seem to be predisposed to having this addiction to sugar. What can we do to balance our sweet tooth?
So you can stick to natural sweeteners. I mean, if you can lean that way to things like fruit, dates, honey, pure maple syrup in small amounts is okay. And I will tell you that your taste buds will change. I was a total non-believer in this. I thought years ago, I mean, there's no way I could ever walk past, a bakery or an ice cream shop and not just, need to have something. But the more you take out and the more real natural sugar you eat, the more satisfied you're going to be with those kinds of sugars. Like you're really going to be satisfied with grapes or an apple or a banana or things like that, as opposed to needing, the cupcake or the cookie or the ice cream. Your taste buds really do change and they become accustomed to what you're currently eating. So there's a saying of like, what you eat today is what you'll crave tomorrow. So if you can lean towards more natural sweeteners, then you will get used to that and your taste buds will find that much sweeter and much more enjoyable than maybe they would be now, because our taste buds are constantly getting hijacked by these hyper palatable, really refined sugary foods. We don't really know what it tastes like, a lot of us, to have like an orange or, something like that. But if you can go to natural sweeteners, that's really great. And then again, just to be aware, like, sugars are hidden everywhere. Keep in mind those 60 names of sugar. So if you're looking to kind of reduce the sugar, you can look that up too. I mean, it's like, some of them make sense. It's cane sugar. And some of them it's like, oh, I wouldn't even know that's the name of a sugar because it doesn't sound anything like a sweetener. Right. So that would be, sticking to natural sweeteners. Getting quality sleep seems kind of odd, but when we're short on sleep, we tend to be short on energy. So our body, being the good little body that it is going to ask for energy or fuel to keep going when we feel tired. And it's going to ask for something that gives us quick energy, like sugar. You're not going to crave a salad necessarily in the morning when you're tired. You're going to crave something that is going to give you that quick energy because your body senses that it's tired, right? You can also stay hydrated. In general, thirst can sometimes mask itself as hunger. So you want to aim to drink about half your body weight in ounces of water each day. But if you're hungry or craving sugar, you can drink a glass of water and wait 10 minutes and just see. Sometimes it goes away and you really were thirsty. And the other thing is you can make your life sweeter. Sounds kind of cheesy, but when you connect with friends
or when, sorry.
What?
A big smirk grew on my face there. Sorry.
When you connect with friends, when you laugh, when you hug your family, when you pet your dog, I mean, a lot of times I think, and most of us would understand this and admit it, right? Like we turn to those sweet treats when we're feeling low, when we're kind of down, when we're having a bad day, when we're stressed. So you can really like, what can you do to kind of like bump up your mood in other ways? And then you won't need to compensate with those sweets. So those are a couple of kind of tips.
So as an integrative health practitioner, what is your stance on artificial sweeteners?
No.
Okay.
Resounding no. There's not even it depends or every once in a while. I just give it a resounding no, because not only are they chemicals, so they negatively impact our body in a lot of different ways. I mean, they're legitimately toxins, but they trick your body, right? So your brain is like, ooh, something sweet. I sense that sugar is coming down, here we go. And so your body mounts its response. So it's going to release insulin, right, in preparation for this sugar that never comes, right? So it would be like prepping for a party and you have all the food and the drink and no guests ever come, right? You're like, well, what
like
am
all
I
my
gonna
parties.
Do? Yeah.
That was well, it has been for the last 2 years. Yeah.
Right. So you know exactly what you do. You're like, well, I guess I better eat and drink all this food and drink, right? So it's like tricking your body. And it's been associated, the artificial sweeteners have been associated time and time again with weight gain, not weight loss, which is why most people consume them or say they consume them, right? So they're chemicals, they trick your body, and they've been associated with weight gain. So I would just say absolutely not to artificial sweeteners. It's just not a good substitute.
Where does stevia sit in this? Because stevia is a natural sweetener, right?
So stevia is a plant. Like my mom grows stevia, and if you tear off the leaf and you put it in your tea becomes quite sweet. So stevia as a plant is fine. It's a plant. It's when, you know, it gets refined and, you know, like when you get a packet of stevia and it's white, I'm not actually sure what happened there. Like the plant is green, right? Like it comes from a green leaf and all of a sudden we have this white powder. So I think in that way, you have to kind of look at the processing part. It's also an opportunity to add like anti-caking agents and, you know, other kind of like additives. So I think that if you see something, and this is very general, but if you see something like stevia leaf, that would be better than like stevia, right? Or if you get like the stevia powder. So I do think that one has to do with the form of how you're taking it in, because a plant, you know, it's a plant.
My jury is still out as to whether sugar is inherently evil or not. I have never really had much of a sweet tooth. And would you put that down to genetic predisposition?
It could be some of that, and it could be how you were, like what kind of foods you were raised on. And if those are, and I do think some people do have more of a sweet tooth, you know, or the craving. And that's why I think it's important to understand how this affects kids, because that's where it starts. So that would just wonder, like, I don't have much of a sweet tooth, and my mom was a 70s granola mom. So we had very little sugar, hardly any soda. So I wonder if that, you know, is part of the journey of where we just didn't need it, or we didn't, you know, have it from a young age. So our bodies are like, yeah, we can live without it.
We could talk about this all day.
I could.
Hey, thank you very much for joining us once again at Good Food Revolution, Jill Bucaro, and we will see you next month.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.